Hello, everyone. Welcome to this amazing webinar, Shining Beyond Subsidies. I am Marcela Bordena. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor at SolarPower Europe. And it's a pleasure to welcome you today and discuss how solar can shine in an era where subsidies to solar are fading away. And I also would like to take the opportunity to introduce you the new SolarPower Europe's finance workstream. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. And I will first start with a brief introduction, and then to bring our discussion to the next level, it's our pleasure to be accompanied by Mr. Jean-Pascal Pamba, the CEO of Scale and also the spokesperson of the Terabat initiative. Mr. Pamba will discuss how innovative business models can create opportunities for solar developers in a post-subsidy area and in a time when the public subsidies are being reduced. We are also accompanied by Mr. Alessandro Boschi, the head of the Renewable Energy Division at the European Investment Bank. And he will introduce us the European Investment Bank programs to bridge the investment gap and scale up solar in Europe. Then we will open the floor to you, to those who are joining us today, and start a Q&A session where you could ask the panelists what are the measures available to bring solar to the next level in Europe. So this is the control panel. And if during the presentation you have any question or remark, this is the control panel that shows you how you can reach us and send us specific questions that I will pass on to the speakers. So you just can type there the question and hit the send button. Perfect. So I would like to start presenting you the results of our study with LUT University, where we show how it's possible to reach an energy system in Europe that runs 100% with renewables. And the main key findings of this study are that a 100% renewable energy system enables the EU to become climate neutral before 2050, and that can be done in a cost-effective manner. Also, that a 100% renewable energy system will lead to the sharpest declines in GHG emissions and down to zero by 2040. And also solar is set to become the dominant source of electricity generation in a climate neutral Europe and generate more than 60% of EU's electricity by 2050. So the main reason behind these results is that solar is the lowest cost generation source and also the most versatile technology, as it can be installed literally almost everywhere, like from the rooftops in the buildings, the parking lots, and also on the buildings' facades. Moreover, solar is the most socially accepted electricity source for all Europeans and the preferred means to help meet our decarbonization objectives. So our 2050 study, that is the first of its kind, and presents the three transition pathways that you can see here in the image below. These transition pathways, they have like varying levels of ambition. So for instance, the first one, a key finding of the report is that the low ambition pathway, the laggard scenario, the one that does not reach the Paris Agreement target, is a burden for society. So from both a climate and also an economic perspective. While the 100% renewable energy scenarios that are the moderate and also the leadership scenarios, they show that achieving a climate neutral Europe by 2050 is actually more cost effective compared to a lower level of ambition. So as you can see, solar will take like a very strong role in the coming years, and it will become like a key pillar in the clean energy transition. So once this webinar finishes, I invite you all to access the study, which is available for free in our website. So we now move to Europe's commitment to climate neutrality and also its commitment to green investments. And to reach climate neutrality by 2050, it will require significant amounts of ambition. And this ambition, of course, needs to be reflected on the key pillars of the European Green Deal. And so for this reason, the Green Deal will include climate mainstreaming across all EU policies. And particularly, we can see at the bottom left that a key pillar of the Green Deal is the financing the energy transition. And with this key pillar, President Ursula von der Leyen wants to provide a long-term signal to direct the financial flows and also the capital flows to green investments. In this line, the European Commission will present a renewed sustainable finance strategy this year, and also it aims to mobilize about 1 trillion of private and also public sustainable investments over the next decade. And by setting out such direction, the Commission is sending us a clear signal that policy will support the transition to a low carbon future. And investors also need to respond accordingly. So while the European Union prepares to put about 30% of the budget into climate-friendly investments, funds are expected to flow from the Just Transition Fund, investment funds, carbon trading, and also the European Investment Bank itself is committed to finance about 1 trillion of investments into clean energy innovation, energy efficiency, and also renewable energy. So much of the finance is required for this transition to a green future. This finance will still need to come from the private sector. So, however, this private sector still finds it challenging to find viable projects with the desired risk profile and also with the desired return profile. So the main obstacles faced by private investors are related to the effects of the current pandemic, which could jeopardize solar deployment. So for instance, in the short term, we can see that access to finance may be more difficult. And also with financing institutions delaying project financing deals or retracting from previous financing conditions. And in the medium term, also medium and long term, announcements of delays and cancellation of tenders might slow down deployment. But a strong recovery is certainly possible in 2021 and beyond. Another obstacle is the lack of regulatory certainty in some EU countries, and also the high financing cost on solar, which can represent about 50% of the solar electricity cost, and therefore harm the profitability of the solar investments. So renewables are actually more sensitive to financing costs, as you can see in the image at the right. So the reasons behind the high financing costs may vary from country to country. You can see the list here. And I want to highlight the last one, for instance, that is the availability or not of state-granted remuneration schemes. Like for example, in Germany, the cost of capital is about 3-5% for a renewable energy plant with a state-granted remuneration scheme, while like a pure equity asset with like full merchant risk is up to 12%. And also projects based on private PPAs, power purchase agreements, they range between 6-8%. So as you can see, the cost of capital with a state-granted remuneration scheme are about 2 to 3 times lower. And for that, like ambition access is really needed to support the solar industry. And we can see here some numbers. And by the end of 2019, so last year, The EU has enjoyed like a total of 132 gigawatts of solar capacity, which that represents about a 14% increase over the previous year. And in fact, in 2019, it was one of the best years for solar. So last year, the European Union installed about 16 gigawatts of new solar capacity, and that's more than 100% increase compared to what was added the year before. And this is the beginning just of an area of growth where our SolarPower Europe's European market outlook forecasts more than 100 gigawatts of new solar capacity to be installed from now up to 2023. So also as shown before, by 2050, solar can generate more than 60% of the electricity in the EU. And this, however, is also paired with an increase of an electricity consumption of about 4 times compared to current levels. So actually, to take solar to the next stage of development in a subsidy area, ambitious action is needed, of course. And we need these ambitious actions to put Europe back on the right track of a green and prosperous growth. And for this, we believe that it will be crucial to leverage innovative business models and also innovative financing schemes, like different business models for solar, like power purchase agreements. Like there's a wide variety. Also you can access our report on this topic in our website, in our resource website. Also another model that's collective self-consumption, cooperatives with virtual power plants, and innovative financing schemes like crowdfunding and aggregation. So we actually can discuss more about these models during the presentation. And to provide the most value to our members, SolarPower Europe launches the new finance workstream with the aim to develop adequate solutions for the solar industry. So through this workstream, we want to provide value focusing on the following 4 main objectives. So the first is that we actually want to create a dialogue between solar project developers and financial investors from the private and also the private sector, private and public sector. So we will facilitate exchanges on hot topics for solar and also provide a platform for business interactions. So in these lines, we are actually preparing a dedicated workshop with the EIB and SolarPower Europe members to exchange on the solutions that the EIB can provide to the solar industry. The second area is to identify the best practices of risk mitigation and also financing strategies for developers and private investors, which are certainly key to take solar to the next stage of development. The third area is to increase a company's international visibility. And for this, we will leverage SolarPower Europe's events for speaking engagements and also facilitate access to international activities. And the fourth one is to shape the EU agenda by engaging with EU and national policymakers to reduce the market and regulatory risks faced by the solar sector and also promote better access to finance. So actually we will do so by influencing, among others, the next renewed sustainable finance strategy, for example. So without further ado, I am actually delighted to give the floor to our panelists. So first, Mr. Jean-Pascal Pamba. He is the CEO of Scale and also the spokesperson at the Terawatt initiative. We'll discuss how innovative business models can create opportunities for solar developers.
Yes, thank you very much, Mercy. Good morning to everyone. I hope first that you and your family safe and sound, and the lockdown is not too cumbersome for you. I'm Jean-Pascal Fanba. I'm the co-founder of Scale, which is the first NGO helping you to think your transition at scale. And I'm also the spokesperson of the Terawatt Initiative. The Terawatt Initiative is an NGO, another NGO, which has been founded at COP21 in Paris. And the mission of Terawatt Initiative, sorry, the mission of Terawatt Initiative, does it work? It's much, okay, sorry for that. Okay. So the mission of Terawatt is to accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy by building new markets needed at scale to scale next generation affordable and clean energy systems capable of delivering the Paris Agreement and the SDGs at transformative pace. And this has been possible thanks to our community and to our members, among which BlackRock, NG, Iberdrola, IBM, KPMG, Schneider Electric, Sugar Group companies, and Total. And we are about to launch our final report, which will be published in June. The title of which will be Well Below 2 cents, and this target being what is needed to actually realize the transition. And what are our findings? First of all, and it's very clear our civilization is in crisis. And to demonstrate that, Kate Raworth has put together, a British economist, has put together a very clear way to present that, which is known as the donut economy. If you go not far enough, you are in a situation of you are breaking the social foundations of the society. So that means that you are not able to provide what the society needs. But if you go beyond the ecological ceiling, that means that you are creating an imbalance within our biosphere. So you need to, and we need collectively to remain into a very thin donut, which is the reason why she called the donut economy. And for the moment, we know that we are either very often below or above these limits, and the civilization is consequently in crisis. And second point is that energy, what we are all working on, is at the core, and for it is at the core of our civilization. Our civilization is only possible with energy, but the energy and all our civilization is an energy regime. By that I mean that it's not only about the technology or the supply of physical good, which is power, but it's also, and maybe even more, an institutional organization. It's an entire regime which has been built by our civilization. It's an entire regime which has been built on fossil fuel, and now we need to find a new energy regime. And this new energy regime is embodied by the SDG 7 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations number 7, which is clean, affordable, reliable, and modern energy for all, as promoted by Rachel Kite. And the tough question that we need to face now is how can a nascent, expensive, and clumsy clean energy system, because that's what we are now, can outcompete at a global level and within 10 years the incumbent fossil fuel system, which has been optimized for more than a century by remarkably bright minds, and which is deeply embedded in our societies. And this is an immense challenge. And for that, the report that we are going to publish is going to emphasize on 7 rethinking that we need to bring to be able to make this transition. First of all, we need really to rethink leadership. And as Mariana Mazzucato, Italian and American economist teaching in London, put it very, very clearly in two of recent books and publications, is first, we need to reconsider the way people think the role of government and the role of business, and to have a much more entrepreneurial government. The main achievements, for instance, in the technology, is not only the result of the private sector. It's also a good public sector acting as an entrepreneur, and not only as fixing market malfunctioning. And the second idea that she brought, and which is inspiring the European Commission right now, and but many other organizations, is the moonshot. It's really important that from a collective perspective, we fix ourselves, we set ourselves very, very ambitious goals. And I think that is precisely what is starting to happen now. And that's great. The second point is we need to rethink uncertainty. And Mercy was mentioning all these questions of risks and de-risking and risk mitigation, and which are linked to the financing. And that's true. Because as we are thinking about changing the energy regime that we are living in, the future by definition is full of uncertainty, but this one is even bigger because we are going into really an unknown territory, and that means two things. That needs first, as Kanika Shavla from the CEW in Delhi put it very well together. It requires two things. It requires first to avoid to misunderstand what are the risks, and the notion of risk perception rather than risk analysis is really important. And for the moment, a lot of people are reacting from a perception which is a false perception. It's a Platonian approach in a sense. And the second thing is that at some point, yes, we need also a leap of faith, and this leap of faith needs to be done by every stakeholder, but it's particularly with the governmental leadership on de-risking instruments, because only the governments have the possibility to think at this kind of horizons and to avoid what Mark Carney called the tragedy of the horizons. Third thing is to rethink communication, and honestly, this is probably one of the toughest one, and one of the on which Terror Initiative had a lot of difficulties, because as Greta Thunberg demonstrates in all senses of the term, actually, this will not be pleasant for everyone, and you can't please everyone. You need to speak the truth, and you need to be clear and very transparent on what it means. But it also means that for the ones whose model are going to disappear, it's also a very important need to take that into account and to accompany this transition so that no one is left behind. We need to rethink policy, and what is currently happening in Europe is really, really interesting, and I think the most important part of it is harmonization. That's the general purpose, I would say, of the European Union, to harmonize the policies and regulations in the European territory. But the fact that a continent as a whole is able to decide that there is a new deal to be made is really important. And the notion of deal is the second very important word that the European Union is bringing. Yes, it's a deal. That means that you need to have around the table all the stakeholders, and all the stakeholders need to have their say and their fair share on the burden, but also on the benefit of the transition. And we need to rethink regulation, and for here in the particular case of solar, and SolarPower Europe is doing an absolutely amazing job. And again, I encourage you to look at everything that has been done. And in particular, the point is that the stakeholders, whether it is the government or the NGOs and the civil society, must not forget that the industrial capabilities which are necessary to deliver at scale are in the hands of the industry. We need to rethink transactions, and we need to think how to decrease the cost of transaction, because for the moment the transactions we do are very, very costly, very expensive, very long. And we need, with very good lawyers like Anne Lapierre at Norton Rose, Fulbright, think how to standardize the transaction, how to standardize the contracts, and how to digitalize the transaction systems that are necessary to make all these very numerous and very different deals into action. And last but not least, we need to rethink financing. And as the climate policy initiative of Barbara Buchner is putting together for many years now, it's really about rethinking, being innovative in the way you finance things, being innovative also in the way you understand what is to be financed, and there is huge differences when you are financing a project, or you are financing a company, or you're financing a startup, or well-established conglomerate or utility. The financing models will be different, but again, they need also to be very much, I would say, standardized and very clear and understandable, and very clear to very easy to analyze by all the stakeholders, so that you create sufficient level of trust among the players in that very complex system. And you need to rethink your business. That's what, for instance, ENGIE and Isabelle Cocher was the CEO of ENGIE and the chairperson of Terawatt Initiative. Rethink your business, and you need to change your business very deeply, and that's what she did. At a transformative pace, and maybe, and that's also a point which is with a political environment which is not necessarily very easy, and it comes with consequences. So what are the key elements of business models that can arise and that will arise from all that? First of all, the value chain is completely changing. So on the top line, you have what is the current value chain, and you have a stock of fossil that we are piling, and for the moment piling very much. And you have a valve, which is how do you control the flow, and this is actually the main question, which is you don't need necessarily energy. What is important is when you get it, and to have a stock and a valve is the most important part of it. And when it's fossil fuel, that means you need to set this fossil material on fire, and from this fire get either power or motion or temperature. And that is what we have been doing for 2 centuries. The next era will be completely the opposite. And you start, and it starts really as a service. With what people need is either power or motion or heat or cold. And you are going to ask yourself how to provide that with electricity, because electricity is the main energy carrier and the one which can be decarbonized the easiest. So you need the control, which is the valve, but it's switch on off, and the switch you need to have a stock, and this is all the storage and all the intelligence of the system to get the energy available on the switch or behind the switch, and for that you need to have the electricity procured by renewables, and in particular by solar, as Mercer explained. will be the largely dominant source of power. So you have a completely inverse model. You're starting by thinking what is the service you want to provide to the customer, and what electricity and how electricity and how the electrical system needs to organize itself to be able to provide this service. And it's about abandoning fire, and giving up fire will not be easy, because it's not only a matter of technology, it's more deeply rooted in our psychology and sociology, and it will also be a very important question of the narrative that comes with that. But so you need to ask yourself 4 strategic questions, and I won't go. It's impossible to go in 15 minutes on all the different business models that will be arising from that, and I'm very happy. I would be very happy to answer your questions and maybe to have more private discussions on that. But if starting by this from the service, you need to ask yourself first: do you contribute to SDG 7? Are you contributing to providing services, energy services, which are affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern, and more importantly for all? And the universality of the service that needs to be given is really important in thinking what is your strategy, what is your business model. Second question is, have you thought your market in the 7 dimensions I mentioned before, which is leadership, risk, communication, policy, regulation, transactions, and financing? And if you don't have the answers to all these questions, you might have problems in deploying your businesses in the future. Other questions: if you divide the market into pathways, actually, you see that you need to outcompete the fossil system, which means that your energy that you're providing and the system that you're putting behind that, and the service in order to provide the service that you need to provide, needs to be cheaper than the fossil system. That means that you are either on the electron part, the generation of electron, or you are in the intelligence part, or both. And the question, you need to ask yourself a question: where are you? Because depending on what side you are and what part you are, your business models and your revenue models and your scale and the way you organize your business and your finance your business will be completely different. And last question is, are you at scale? Because whether you are a project, you are a business, a community, or investor, we are talking about figures at the trillion magnitude, and that means that the businesses that are going to arise are going to be thought at scale always. If they are not at scale, they will not survive in the system. And this is I would say, the advertising part of it. So scale is the sustainability transitions advisory. Whether you're a project, business, community, or investor, we are designing strategies, we are building ecosystems, brokering green deals, structuring scalable projects, and designing tools for you in all the 17 SDGs, and in particular in health, energy, water, and cities. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer your questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pascal, for bringing light on the role of government leadership to the risk finance. And also, I also especially liked what you mentioned about rethinking communications to left and no one behind. And indeed, in SolarPower Europe, we are working very hard in rethinking regulation. So indeed, we are highly involved, particularly in industrial policy now. That will be key to empower our local industry to manufacture more local components. So thank you very much for bringing that up. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Alessandro Boschi, the head of the Renewable Energy Division at the EIB, who will introduce us the European Investment Bank programs to bridge the investment gap and scale up solar in Europe.
Thank you very much, Mercé, and good morning, everybody. Thank you also for this, Jean-Pascal, for this inspiring presentation. I mean, clearly the starting point for all of us is the fact that the world is not on track to meeting the Paris Agreement, which is about being well below 2 degrees and aiming at 1.5. So this is, if you like, also the overarching theme that is leading the bank's strategy on climate, which will be the main theme on my presentation. But let me then scroll through the slides. Yes, I mean, just a few words for those of you who are not familiar with the European Investment Bank. So the European Investment Bank is a public bank and it's based in Luxembourg. It's owned by, I would say now, the 27 EU member states. It was created with the Treaty of Rome, so it's more than 60 years ago now. And it is basically the long-term lending institution of the EU. It's the EU bank, if you like. And we are driven obviously by European policy in everything we do. So we structure our policy objective around policy goals. So we have, if you like, 4 public policy goals, which are environment, innovation, SMEs, infrastructure. And then we have a number of overarching horizontal goals, and obviously climate is one of them. In terms of our lending activity, we lend around 63 billion euros of lending every year. This was the figure for last year, and around 90% of this would be in the European Union, and around 10% outside the EU. How we finance ourselves? I mean, we actually borrow money on the international capital markets. We issue bonds. So of course, the member states have shares in the bank, but actually we are financing ourselves through the capital markets. And we like to say that the 3 core activities of what we do is lending. Blending means co-financing with other financial instruments, which could be together with European Commission guarantees, for example, but it's also, for example, outside the European Union, it is financing together with other international financing institutions, such as the World Bank or also the European bilateral institutions. So as I was saying before, so climate has been, if you like, at the center of the bank's strategy for quite some time. So it's not new. Actually, we established our climate strategy in 2015, so the same year that of the Paris Agreement. So we presented this strategy in Paris, which was already then defining, if you like, our mission of having a lead role in mobilizing finance, to keep global warming well below 2 degrees. So in the meantime, we have actually supported around 170 billion euro of lending to climate since 2012. So this is already, if you like, a significant part of what the bank is doing. But at the end of last year, we took a further step. So we actually, the board of directors approved what we called and what they called an increased ambition in climate. So this has basically 3 main pillars. So the first one is by the end of this year, which actually is the last one of the 3 you see here in the slide. So the first pillar is that by the end of this year, we want to align all the bank's lending activities to the Paris Agreement. Okay. On energy, we've actually already done it at the end of last year through our energy lending policy. I will tell you about in a moment. But this is about all the bank's activity in all sectors, not just energy. So this is the first thing. Then we want to increase our financing to climate action and environment to 50% of our lending from a level which is currently around 30%. This is by 2025. And then we want to mobilize over the next decade, we want to mobilize investments for climate action and environment for 1 trillion euros. So these are the three overarching goals. And if we speak about energy, I mean, on energy, we already aligned ourselves to Paris through our lending policy that was approved by our board at the end of last year. So our previous lending policy dated back to 2013, so that was ages ago in terms of what the energy systems have evolved since then. So obviously the new policy reflected that energy transition, but it was also driven, as I was mentioning, by the Paris Agreement and by the European Commission legislative framework on clean energy, so the Clean Energy for All package, and then the Clean Planet for All package, which was the vision, the long-term vision, and then actually at the end of last year as well, the European Green Deal, which wants to make the EU the first climate-neutral continent in the world, and the EIB is supporting the European Commission in this objective. So in the energy lending policy, I mean, there are two key themes, if you like, overarching. Well, first of all, the investment needs are huge. So only the energy sector, we're talking about around 400 billion euros of investments each year, which are needed to finance the energy transition. And so the bank's lending in energy, we're doing around 15 billion euros. So you can see that we cannot finance everything. We are, of course, an important element, but we need also to focus on where EIB can provide added value, because there are many investments that are taking place without the need of EIB, but there are some where EIB can add more value. So that's one of the aspects that is being looked at in the energy lending policy. Then we took a bold move of phasing out our lending to fossil fuels. So this will happen gradually, but it is a clear commitment to phase out lending also to natural gas. So the focus will be on energy efficiency and decarbonization. And decarbonization for energy supply is mainly renewable energy. And then the other dimension, which I think is important, is the engagement with member states. Because as you know, under the governance directive of the Clean Energy for All package, the member states have prepared national energy and climate plans. So there are no binding targets for renewables at member state level, but each member state has to present its plan. So we're taking the engagement to have a stronger dialogue with all the member states to see how the EIB can support and where actually we are needed. So we have started this dialogue. We're counting on continuing this. So when we speak specifically about renewables, as I said, so renewables and solar in particular are key to decarbonizing the economy. Electricity will play, as we already heard from Jean-Pascal, a key role in decarbonizing all the other sectors. So obviously, solar will have to play a big role. So solar is recognized in our lending policy as a mature and competitive technology. Actually, incredibly enough, it seems ages ago, in 2013, we were still considering solar as an emerging technology. Right now, it is a very competitive technology. And the challenge is really the large scale. So I think we saw from SolarPower Europe the various scenarios, but clearly solar and these scenarios vary, but it is obvious that the capacity will need to increase significantly in the next years to deliver on the objectives for renewables. So we're talking in one of the scenarios of the Commission about tripling the capacity from 2015 to 2030. So and there are scenarios which are probably even more ambitious than that. So this is unprecedented, and it's not just about billion of euros. It's about gigawatts of capacity. That's also very important because the cost of the technology have gone down. So in terms of billion, you don't fully capture the scale of the challenge. It is really, in terms of capacity, a very huge challenge. So I think one of the, in terms of where the EIB can add value, I think we heard about, for example, supporting new business models and innovative finance systems. I think we need to do that. We need to change a bit the way we approach the sector, because there are new clients and new business models out there, and we need to reach out to them. We need to support the integration of renewables in the market. So, for example, through corporate PPAs. I would provide an example a bit later. And of course, there are other aspects which are key: cooperation among regions and member states, in order to make sure that, you know, the projects are developed in the places where the solar resource is the highest. So you can do that also through cross-border schemes. And of course, for solar, it's not only about larger schemes, but it's also about decentralized and community schemes embedded in new systems, which could envisage demand-side management and so on. So we need to be able to reach out to these projects as well. And of course, the other dimension is innovative technologies, where I think where access to finance may be more difficult. And so I think the bank has still a role to play there. So in terms of, just to give you an idea of our lending to the sector. So to the energy sector, so the first chart on the top, you see our lending to the energy sector as a whole. So we are between 10 and 15 billion euros, depending on the year. And we've had, over the last 6 years, an increasing focus on energy efficiency and renewables, which are the two, the yellow and the green at the bottom. And actually, most of the rest is electricity networks. So we've been already, you know, before the new energy lending policy was approved, lending really less and less to anything else that was not renewables, energy efficiency, or grids. And actually, wind and solar account for more than 50% of the lending to renewables. In the bottom chart, you see a lending to the solar, and you see how that has increased, I would say, stably over 1 billion euro a year now. And this includes, you know, both solar PV and concentrated solar power, where we had a number of large projects essentially outside the European Union. And then in terms of the PV, 70% of that has been actually in the European Union, and it's been a mix of utility scale solar PV and also smaller scale through commercial banks and equity funds. I will show you an example a bit later on. Besides the lending, the other thing the EIB can do is we can offer also technical and financial advisory. And we can do that throughout the project cycle. So from, if you like, project preparation upstream, and it can be at project level or at policy and program level with national authorities, for example, or during, let's say, the implementation and the operation of the project. So throughout the project cycle, we can do that. And we have a number of initiatives I mentioned here briefly. So the European Investment Advisory Hub, which is, let's say, the advising arm of the investment plan for Europe, which is the instrument we have developed with the European Commission over the last years to support these kind of projects. So we have that possibility. We have another facility which is called Innofin Energy Demo Projects. This is specifically tailored to early stage innovative low carbon technologies, where we have both a financing instrument to de-risk those kind of projects, but we can also assist projects in their earlier development phase so that they can be then later ready for financing. We have Elena, you might have heard about. So Elena is basically an instrument to provide technical assistance for energy efficiency and renewable energy. It's targeting buildings and innovation in urban transport. Okay, so as far as I will have an example later, So as far as solar is concerned, it's solar in buildings. So we can support, provide technical assistance to solar in buildings. From 2021, so from next year, our financial instruments with the Commission, the former FC, will be grouped under a new facility which is called InvestEU. You might have heard about, and this again will include a number of de-risking instruments where the Commission is providing the bank with a guarantee that allows us actually to take more risk on projects that we could without this guarantee, and also it will have technical assistance facilities as well. So in terms of the products, so very quickly, we have a number of products that we can provide to support solar projects. So, and they vary from loans to corporates. They can be framework loans. So framework loans to corporates are basically investment plans. So for a typical investment loan would be to a specific project. A framework loan is where the corporate is presenting a program, and then we can support that program. We can also do intermediate financing. Normally, this is the way we can capture smaller projects. So then we lend to commercial banks who pass through the benefit of our lending, and they can then on lend to smaller projects. We are doing more and more project finance transactions for non-recourse projects. We can do program loans. I have an example on Poland later where we don't identify, if you like, the borrower yet when we receive the approval. We just define, if you like, the scope of the transaction. It could be solar PV in Poland. I have an example a few slides later. Besides debt, we can also do equity or quasi-equity in some cases. I mean, the equity we normally do through funds. So rather than direct equity is normally to co-finance investments that the bank has done. And as I mentioned, we have de-risking schemes where we have a guarantee from the Commission under FC, Innofin, InvestEU in the future, where we can take higher risk, for example, on project finance operations with some degree of market risk. And I have an example on that in the next slides. Exactly. So, for example, in the case of Spain, we have recently financed two operations. So one was under FC, so it was a loan to an SPV, a special purpose vehicle that is developing and constructing a solar PV. And we received the guarantee from the Commission that has allowed us basically to enter into a transaction which is riskier than a few years ago, because in Spain you don't have any kind of subsidy scheme in place to support solar here. So the SPV has actually signed a power purchase agreement for 10 years with a utility. Not for 100% of the production, so a part of the production is exposed to the market. And then our loan is 3 years longer than the PPA. So then we have 3 years of what we call merchant tail. So this is, I think, a good example of the way the EIB can support this kind of project in combination with the guarantee from the Commission. Another example is a scheme, a quasi-equity financing to a promoter who has actually who's developing a portfolio of projects. So it's not a single project. So this promoter has created a holding company that owns shares in special purpose vehicles that own SPVs. And in this case, we're financing the holding company, which is then on lending, if you like, to the project which are downstream. And here it's actually a quasi-equity tranche, so we're really financing, if you like, the growth of the business of this promoter. And again, we were able to do this through the FC guarantee from the Commission that was able to de-risk a lending and also to provide more interesting financing terms to our borrower. And again, being in Spain, the projects are exposed to merchant risk quite, for an important part of their revenues. Another example, which I mentioned before, so program loan. So in this case, we looked at Poland, and Poland was and is doing auctions to support renewables and solar PV in particular. So the initial auctions that Poland held were mainly for smaller projects below 1 megawatt, and now they're opening also to larger capacities. So with this program loan, basically we got an umbrella approval by our board to support Poland on these tenders. Okay, and then once we had this approval, we were able in a much smoother way and much faster way, if you like, to support specific operations, sub operations. And just an example here. So this was a sub operation with 66 1 megawatt PV plants, which the promoter then bundled into one project of 66 megawatts. And here we were able to finance this project. And in this case, there is some support in the form of a contract for difference, from the Polish government, but still, this is a hedging mechanism, so the promoter still needs to enter into PPAs with private counterparts. So this was, another example of financing product that the bank can deploy. An example of technical assistance. So I mentioned that Elena is targeting buildings, so in energy efficiency and renewable in buildings. In this case, we supported basically the Association of Social Housing Companies in the Flanders, who was putting together an investment program for PV on the homes. And here, basically, through Elena, we are providing assistance to the beneficiary in developing this project. So it's about establishing the company that will act as a PAU. I mean, making audits on the buildings to assess, what kind of PV installations would be the most efficient for each building, and then helping them in the contractual structuring of this facility, in procuring the supply of the modules and the construction and the operation. So this is an example where, of course, there was the important thing under Elena is the need to bundle. So we can target small projects, but typically they have to be investment programs above 30 million euro. So that means that it is important, to aggregate smaller projects. And actually, Elena can also support, if you like, promoters in doing that. And also the good thing of this project in Belgium is that it can be replicated, in other member states where there's a social housing stock that is available for this PV installations. So I close it here. I think that the message is that so EIB is the climate bank, and we're going to be aligning all we do to Paris by the end of this year, also in the other sectors, so in mobility, industry, for example. And clearly in energy, solar has become extremely competitive, and it's a key technology to achieving the decarbonization targets. And we want to support it through our range of financial and technical assistance products. And so we're happy to to engage with SolarPower Europe and with all promoters and stakeholders who are involved in this technology, to also in a way to an extent possible to tailor and adapt our approach to the specific needs of each client. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Thank you very much for bringing us light on especially on the new energy lending policy, which is actually certainly it shows an increase in ambitions in climate from the side of the EIB, and that aligns, as mentioned, also with the ambition from the European Commission. So that's excellent news. And also, thank you for providing an overview of the different products that the EIB provides, and also the specific examples that I'm very sure that it has been like very, very useful for our audience. And in this line, I would like to start the Q&A session. And actually, we have plenty of questions from our audience, and I will try to cluster them and bring into you. Very good. And this is just a reminder of what is mentioned before, that you can find at your right the control panel to send us the questions. So just write them down and hit the send button. Very good. So we have several questions coming up. And for instance, for Alessandro, our audience would like to know, actually, in general terms, in broad terms, which is the framework that the EIB uses to value the different solar projects. Because of course you would be receiving a lot of applications, and you need to pick up some, and you may to discard another one. So which are, in general terms, the broad framework?
Okay, yes, thank you for the question. Well, first of all, we have no specific formality for coming to the IB. So, I mean, you can drop me an email after this webinar, for example. So there's no formality in that. I think the first thing we look at is you know, the stage of development of the project. So at what stage is it? I mean, what kind of need it has in that very moment. So if it is a project that is already well developed, looking for financing, then I think we will be looking at the, you know, at the various aspects of the project. I mean, the promoter, what technology it is using, what kind of contracts it intends to enter. Does he have, you know, an EPC, you know, for the construction? What about the contract for the operation and maintenance, the modules? And then, of course, as I mentioned before, I mean, nowadays, one of the key aspects is what about the revenues of the project? So under what regulation does it fall under? And if it's not under a specific regulation, meaning it does not have any support from the national regulation, then we would, you know, require the project to have some kind of power purchase agreement, and then we would engage into a discussion of what you know, what are the requirements for us on the various contracts. But I think we don't have a specific you know, rule. Of course, we would then based on all these components decide what kind of financing is the right one for the project. I mean, if it would be a project finance kind of financing, and then whether this could be, for example, then fall under a risk-sharing initiative with the European Commission. I mean, which is typically the right instrument over the last years to target project finance operations with some exposure to market, if you like. Instead, if it is a corporate, then you know, the other option is that we have a corporate loan, which is a more standard kind of loan, where the bank is not taking a specific risk on the project, but it's looking at the balance sheet of the company. I mean, on each, maybe something useful to say. I mean, on each project, we always have. I mean, if the project is, let's say, developed enough, you know, to start the conversation, we would put together a team on the IB side. So there would be an expert in the sector. If it is in renewable energy, it would be from my team, and then there would be a loan officer, which is responsible for the financing, which is then based on the geography. So depending where the project is, there would be a loan officer from that geography. And then, of course, we have a credit risk department who's also then at some point taking a view on the pricing of a loan. But this is, I would say that this is more internal. So vis-a-vis the client, it will typically be an engineer with an economist and a financier. And then I think, yeah, once we start the conversation, then I think the promoter will better understand also how we work and how we value the project, as you asked.
Very good, thank you. Also, some questions are specifically on how to reduce the cost of capital. So maybe Jean-Pascal, you have covered this area. What do you think, or in your opinion, that can be some business models that would enable us to decrease the cost of capital on solar projects? I think we cannot hear you.
Yeah, sorry for that. I think the cost of capital is generally linked to two things, which is on one side the risk, on the other side the complexity of the transaction scheme. The cost of capital per se, the risk is really a matter of how not only the project is developed, but in what kind of environment it is developed. And that is one of the main issue that needs to be always thought through by the stakeholders, is really to align the frameworks and the contractual organization, so that and the commercial organization for sure, so that at the end there is structurally as limited risk as possible, but there will always be a remaining, I would say, risk, which is basically the reason why the bank is get remunerated. And for that, either it is acceptable and the remuneration is fair, and on the side of the bank, the remuneration is very often well measured now in Europe, not necessarily in other markets, but in Europe, especially with experts like EIB, they know what they do and they know and what they're engaging. Or it's the level of risk remains too high for the perception, or for the analysis of the banks, and then you need to have some kind of support, which is generally public support. Or at the end of the process is one form of public support or another. So you need to have I would say intrinsic de-risking by the well-structured, well-organized framework, well-structured project in a well-organized framework. And for what remains, either it's acceptable or you need to have some sort of public support on top of that. And on the transaction side, you need really not to forget this part, because the transactions are very, very costly, especially in project finance, because you need to assess a lot of things and you need to due diligence a lot of things. The more the system is standardized, the easier it is to assess the risks, and it's though the less cost of transaction you need to engage, and the less lead time also you need to engage to get to that. So it's really a multi-stakeholder discussion, and that's why what you are doing at SolarPower Europe and what the European Commission is currently doing, what the EIB is doing, is really important, and it all works together. It's really a collective effort that needs to be done, and this is the sense of I think the Green New Deal. It's precisely a deal. It's precisely where everybody has to come to the table, bring something, take something.
Very good, thank you. And you mentioned that one of the measures, one of the possibilities to bring down this cost of capital is through aggregation. So through aggregation of projects, and also leveraging digitalization and trying to decrease the cost of doing due diligence. So on this line, if I'm not mistaken, correct me, Alessandro, that relates to the example that you have provided which shows one that is about a portfolio of projects. Is this like the same example? So the one that you have provided, the case study of a portfolio of projects, it has been able also to reduce the cost associated to doing the due diligence?
Yes, I mean, I think for sure the Polish example is a good example. I mean, frankly speaking, it was the promoter himself who had done this aggregation, because as I mentioned in Poland, so for that particular tender, the schemes that were allowed to tender were all below 1 megawatt, and you can understand that structuring a transaction, for such a small scheme, which may not be small for the promoter, but for a bank and for a project finance transaction, it would be small, because you had to put in place, even for a 1 megawatt scheme, a whole financial structure with a PPA, with contracts and so on. So in that case, the promoter bundled the schemes into 66 small schemes, and of course, in terms of contractual structure, it was simplified. So not all the schemes had a separate contract. I mean, the contract were obviously at the higher level, and the whole transaction was much smoother on our side. We did also something else for that program loan. We actually supported, let's say, the promoters. We selected ourselves a lender technical advisor up front. Okay, so it wasn't obligatory for the promoters to use it, but we said, okay, because normally these promoters also have less experience, for this size of project. So we also made that available, so they could then come to us, and we could offer not only a lending, but also the lending, the LTA, and that also proved to be quite useful to simplify the transaction cost and the timing and so on. So I think this is really a good example.
Yeah, if I may, I think Alessandro, you're perfectly right. The aggregation is risk mitigation in itself, and if you have it's a risk mitigation, and it addresses the granularity issue in the renewable space in particular. We will face, in solar in particular, we will face the granularity issue, which is two small projects, one by one, to be bankable, or to be of interest for the size of the financial industry. So you need to aggregate, but by doing that, you are not only creating the size which is necessary to address I would say, the size issue of the banks, but you also create naturally a de-risking factor, because if you have a lot of small projects, the probability that all projects fail at the same time together is much lesser than having a huge project failing that can fail, and it's a one on-off situation. So and if you integrate, I would say, this natural mitigation factor, which is mutualization, then you get also to improve the bankability of your projects.
And I think for solar in particular, it is really important, because I mean, solar by nature, is land intensive, if you like. So it occupies land, and you may not have the possibility to develop a very large project in one place, but then you can have many smaller projects, but you still would be very efficient to bundle them from all points of view, and certainly for the financing as well. As Jean-Pascal was saying, that there's also a kind of risk sharing among the projects. Of course, it would depend on the specific structure of each project and the contractual structure, to what extent they're exposed to different risks. But absolutely, I think for solar, it's certainly one of the ways to the risk.
Very good. And another very important discussion that we are having at European level is actually on the EU taxonomy. So our audience also would like to know whether there is the possibility to relate the criteria of the taxonomy, meaning on sustainability of solar, with the criteria from the EIB, and this relates to whether more like sustainable solar panels, they would be more prone to receive, say, loans with lower interest rates. So whether actually the sustainability criteria of the panels is linked to the interest rates of the loans that the EIB can provide.
Well, I mean, of course, we are looking at the taxonomy, like all of us, to see what the final criteria are defined, because I mean, this is about green financing and sustainable finance in general. I mean, I would say that on renewable, with the energy lending policy, we are pretty much we'll be pretty much aligned with the taxonomy. I mean, when it comes to as you said, the environmental impacts of and sustainability of the modules, for example, I mean for sure. I mean, this is if to the extent that this will be then enshrined in the legislation, the need to comply with specific requirements from that point of view. Of course, this the capacity of the project to comply with those requirements will be one of the factors to assess. So, I mean, from a policy point of view, we fully support that dimension, which is again about aligning not just in the way we produce the electricity, but it's also how we produce the modules there and how we dispose of the modules at the end. So certainly we would adapt our lending to the needs of the taxonomy. And from a risk point of view, again, if there will be legal obligation at a national level and project level, those will be then assessed when we assess the risk of the project for our lending.
Maybe
Right.
a comment. Maybe a comment on that. I think that the EU taxonomy is more regulation or policy which is aimed at helping the investors, whether it is at professional level, professional investors, or even individuals, to decide on what they are going to invest and to be able to know on what they are going to invest. And at some point, with the forces of the market based on the EU taxonomy, will lead to a situation where, if you are not a sustainable investment as per the EU taxonomy, you will not get the money at all, because people, either because they are obliged to not investing, or because their constituent or the saving, the people that are saving their money are just asking, we don't want our money to be invested in something which is not compliant with the EU taxonomy. So at the end of the day, it's really a matter of life or death. If you are not compliant with the EU taxonomy, the market will not provide you the capital you need. Full stop.
Yeah. And another big discussion that we are having at EU level is actually the Renovation Wave initiative, because we know that about 90% of the rooftops, they are being unexploited here in Europe. So more than 90% of the rooftops in Europe could be used to install their solar panels. Not only the rooftops, but also the building's facades itself. So the EIB, they have, for instance, this ELENA program to provide the technical and also financial advisory. Specifically, you have mentioned on buildings. Also, does it have experience on providing this advisory for also flexible solar cells for the cells installed in the building's facades?
Well, I mean, not so far. I think that the building integrated PV is still a bit in early stage of development, I would say, as products and as a market. So I think that, of course, I mean, we could. I'm not sure if Elena would be the right product, because I mean Elena is targeting more, you know, commercial mature and commercially mature. But I mentioned, for example, the Innofin Energy Demo projects, where we are looking at you know, new technologies in solar, and where we could both provide technical assistance and also financing to projects. So I think we would have to see, because I mean the key thing is that the building integrated PV is a very promising area, but it's a bit at kind of early stage of development.
Okay. Also, Jean-Pascal, from your experience, are you familiar also with these more like innovative technologies, in the sense that building integrated PVs? Because as you mentioned, it would be key to rethink a regulation, and for that we are now in discussions around the industrial solar policy. So we believe that investing also hard in these more innovative technologies like BIPV, that would be key to boost the industry in Europe. Do you think also that the industrial strategy for Europe should focus in this type of innovative technologies?
It's a very difficult question. I would say from a macro perspective, if you remind the graph that I presented, the E plus I, either you are in the electron generation and then your objective is to be as cheap as possible, or you are bringing a service, an energy service to the system as a whole, and then you can have a much more added value. And the IPV is somehow maybe a difficult idea to push, because as from the power production or the electron generation perspective, it is very costly. So either the policy is able to bring that as an absolute obligation, so there's no wonder everybody is going to do it, or you rely on the market, and then the cost issue will be a problem for you. And from a technical perspective and a practical perspective, because it's very difficult to see how the building integration will become a very cost-effective system in the short range. That said, if you integrate at the same time the IPV plus intelligence, what is battery and energy management, and then you can outcompete the grid itself, then you have a potential of market. But it's just not the IPV, it's really to have the building as an energy system as a whole, and it's a little different story. So you need to be at the same time E plus I and outcompete the grid.
Very good. And in your point of view, how do you think the role of the energy communities in this energy transition? So do you think that the concept of the energy communities would have like a very important role in this transition, and do we have to do more to help them?
Well, it's about the more, I would say, the I part of the equation. We have built for a century a system where the grid was delivering one way. Here we are getting to a point where everybody can be at the same time consumer, a power generator, and also a storage operator. So
that's very important as well.
Absolutely. And the technology is enabling you to very efficiently at very low cost create transaction systems which are very efficient at any kind of level of the system. whether it is at global, national, or European or national grid level, or at the very, very, very local communities. And it's very difficult to know who is going to win on that, and maybe and even probably in Europe. I wouldn't say that for Africa, for instance, but in Europe, it will probably be a balance of it all, because you will need to have a grid, and the grid is offering really important, I would say, stability and security of procurement services, but it's not necessarily economically efficient. And all the problem will be how the regulator and how to the planification of the system. How can you planify a global grid or a continental grid with the emergence of very rapid emergence of very local communities and systems, and this is a political issue, and because at some point you will ask people and the decision makers to make a choice between one and the other, but maybe the way of thinking that is probably more to offer to everyone the possibility to procure what they can at the best possible terms for the society as a whole.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, from my point of view, absolutely is the answer. In short, no, for sure, the energy paradigm is shifting, and for sure, the energy transition will include more and more, consumers who are actively participating to the markets. And I mean, this is it's not just a nice thing to have. I think it's a must. It's a must because, with an increasing level of renewable energy penetration, you will need also to have demand side management. So I mean, the consumers need to be more and more having an active role. And otherwise, this new system will not work. And it will have to be, so I see it in combination with having local generation, but in combination with demand side management. And of course, I mean, I agree with Jean-Pascal. The grid, we will still need the grid. We will still need the grid because we will have also generation that is remote. We'll have the offshore wind, for example, out in the oceans, and the onshore wind out in the countryside. And sometimes that wind will be necessary for the consumers. But I think this will have to be then in combination with some local generation and with demand side flexibility in consuming. I mean, having also a more, and especially if you see this in combination also with the electrification of the other sectors. I mean, like mobility, because I mean, then the consumers will play a role also in that space, in charging the batteries of their cars, in the right moments when it makes sense for the system, if you like. So yes, I would say absolutely yes in the wider context of the demand side management and having consumers more and more active in the energy markets, if you like. And this is not necessarily building integrated. I mean, this can happen already now. So with rooftop schemes and with community, also small land-based, where that is possible. But I mean, for sure, this is something that where the market could be active already now.
That's right. So I think that these are very good concluding remarks. Because we are just need to finish our webinar. It's just about the time. So I just would like to say I thank you all also very much. And to conclude, I would like to mention as well that indeed, if we are to become climate neutral by 2050, we would need to actually leverage significant amounts of investments to renewables over the coming decades. And for that, I would like to remember our audience that indeed SolarPower Europe and our members, we are very much looking forward to working together with financial institutions, with the private sector, and also with EU policy stakeholders to enable solar to deliver this great promise. So if you would like to engage in our activities, do not hesitate to get in touch with us. And I just would like to invite you as well to follow our upcoming discussions on solar in the frame of SolarPower Europe's Shine On series. So the upcoming webinar will be on the impact of COVID on the African solar sector, and the following one will be also on COVID and the operating solar power plants, the challenges and the opportunities. So as mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, you can access to the recording, also to the slides of the presentations just after we finish with it. And really loud to conclude, I really would like to thank our audience, and also many thanks for our engaging panelists, Mr. Pascal Pamba and also Mr. Alessandro Boschi, for the very insightful content and also the very interesting discussion. So thank you very much again, and I wish you all a very lovely day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.